The frozen forests of Belgium held secrets in those early morning hours of December 19, 1944. Klaus Wendel, holding the rank of Unteroffizier in the Wehrmacht, sat cramped inside his Panther tank's turret at 23 minutes past 6, wrestling with a pencil that had nearly frozen solid. His gloved hands moved across the pages of his personal notebook while his breath created small clouds in the confined space. He wrote about something that had been haunting German tank crews for days now. The Americans had deployed a new kind of hunter, he recorded. They could hear these machines but never actually see them. By the time German crews managed to rotate their turrets toward the sound, these mysterious vehicles had already disappeared. Just the previous day, 3 Tigers had been destroyed by these phantom attackers. Through the commander's cupola, Wendell stared into the darkness that preceded dawn, knowing somewhere beyond those tree lines the American 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had positioned their M18 Hellcats. What this German tanker couldn't possibly know was that in precisely 17 minutes, everything he understood about armoured combat would be completely overturned by an American machine that violated every single principle of tank warfare the Wehrmacht had refined through 5 brutal years of conflict. The Panther beneath Wendell carried a 75mm gun capable of penetrating any American tank from 2,000 meters away. Its frontal armor could deflect most Allied shells. It represented German engineering at its absolute peak, heavy and powerful and methodical. Yet within just 3 minutes of making first contact, Wendell would watch multiple German tanks get destroyed by vehicles moving at speeds his own tank couldn't achieve even on paved roads. The massive German offensive in the Ardennes was entering its 4th day, and across the frozen forests spanning Belgium and Luxembourg, German tank crews were discovering something absolutely terrifying. The Americans had constructed something that hunted in a completely different way than any armoured vehicle in military history. Not stronger or heavier, just faster than anything anyone had imagined could survive on a battlefield. The genesis of the M18 Hellcat traced back to December 1941, right as America entered the war. While German tank doctrine had evolved from principles emphasizing overwhelming firepower and protection, eventually producing 45-ton Panthers and nearly 70-ton King Tigers, American designers working at General Motors took a radically different approach that would terrify German crews 3 years later. The Tank Destroyer Force came into existence under General Leslie McNair's directive on November 21, 1941, operating on a straightforward principle documented in Field Manual FM 18-5. Seek, strike, and destroy. The emphasis fell on speed and firepower rather than armour. The M18, designated as T-70 during development, would embody this philosophy to an extreme that German tank designers considered absolutely suicidal. Buick Motor Division in Flint, Michigan received the contract in January 1942. Chief Engineer Joseph Roberts faced specifications that seemed completely contradictory. Mount a 76mm high-velocity gun capable of destroying any German tank. Maintain a low profile for concealment. Achieve speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, all while keeping the total weight under 20 tons. The solution defied everything conventional tank design stood for. The M18's armour measured merely 25.4 millimeters at its thickest point on the turret front, with just 12.7 millimeters on the hull front, barely enough to stop heavy machine gun fire. A German 88mm shell wouldn't just penetrate this armour, it would pass completely through both sides of the vehicle. The design prioritized mobility above absolutely everything else. But it was during the breakout from Normandy where German tank crews first encountered what would become their nightmare. On July 29, 1944, near Coutances in France, elements from German heavy tank battalions reported deeply disturbing engagements with American tank destroyers that vanished before the Germans could even return fire. After-action reports documented enemy vehicles exhibiting speeds estimated at 80 kilometers per hour over rough terrain, with engagement times from first shot to complete disappearance measuring approximately 180 seconds. The mathematics were simple and absolutely terrifying. A Panther tank's turret required 60 full seconds to complete one full rotation. Its maximum speed reached 34 miles per hour on roads, 15 miles per hour cross-country. The M18 Hellcat could accelerate from 0 to 30 miles per hour in 7 seconds, maintain 55 miles per hour on roads, 60 without the governor, and sustain 26 miles per hour cross-country. In the 3 minutes it took a German crew to identify the threat, rotate their turret, acquire the target and fire, the Hellcat could displace nearly a mile and a half. The fear German tankers experienced wasn't irrational paranoia. The M18's 76mm M1A2 gun, while unable to penetrate Panther frontal armour with standard M62 APCBC ammunition, could easily defeat the 40mm side armour at 1,500 metres. With M93 HVAP tungsten core rounds, though severely limited in supply with crews receiving only 1 or 2 rounds monthly, penetration reached 157mm at 500 yards. The gun's muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second meant the shell arrived before the sound of the shot. German doctrine emphasized methodical engagement, careful target acquisition, deliberate aiming, conservation of ammunition. Crews drilled extensively on fighting from static positions, using terrain for hull-down placement. The Panther and Tiger were designed specifically for this doctrine. Heavily armoured, powerful guns, slow but steady advancement. The Hellcat shattered every single aspect of this training. M18 crews trained at Camp Hood, Texas, established specifically as the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center on 158,706 acres, were taught to never remain stationary for more than 30 seconds after firing. The motto speed is life became standard doctrine. Where German doctrine emphasized the decisive shot, American tank destroyer doctrine preached shoot and scoot. Between July 1943 and October 1944, Buick's Flint, Michigan plant produced exactly 2,507 M18 Hellcats, far fewer than the originally planned 8,986 vehicles. Production included 6 pilot models, an initial contract for 1,000 vehicles, and a final order of 1,507 units. Peak monthly production reached 267 units in November 1943. This production rate, while modest compared to Sherman tank output, still exceeded German Panther production. While Germany struggled to produce 90 Panthers monthly by late 1944, the American factories had already completed the entire Hellcat production run. The disparity meant that while German crews knew each lost Panther or Tiger was essentially irreplaceable, American forces could rapidly replace any losses. The M18 featured a Wright R975 radial engine, originally designed for aircraft. Early production vehicles, serial numbers 1 through 1,350, used the naturally aspirated R975C1, producing 350 horsepower, while later models, serial 1,351 through 2,507, received the supercharged R975C4, generating 400 horsepower beginning in March 1944. This power, combined with the vehicle's 17.7 to 20-ton weight, depending on configuration, created an exceptional power-to-weight ratio of 32.5 horsepower per ton, compared to the Panther's 15 horsepower per ton. The Hellcat's hydromatic automatic transmission with torque converter allowed drivers to maintain maximum speed while maneuvering, a critical advantage over German tanks requiring manual shifting and clutch operation. The ground pressure of just 10.5 pounds per square inch, less than many wheeled vehicles, meant Hellcats could traverse mud and snow that immobilized 57-ton Tiger is with their 15.2 psi ground pressure and 69.8-ton Tiger IIs. The breakout from Normandy in August 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of Hellcat doctrine. During Operation Cobra, beginning July 28, 1944, the 63rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had received M18 October 1943 and landed at Utah Beach July 21st through 22nd, participated in the sweep through Brittany. The 704th and 705th Battalions, also equipped with M18, joined the rapid advance. Traditional tank warfare would have dictated careful, covered approaches and sustained firefights. Instead, M18 crews executed what became known as rapid flanking attacks, using their superior speed to strike from unexpected directions before German turrets could traverse to meet the threat. The Battle of Aracourt, fought September 18th to 29th, 1944, near the Nancy bridgehead across the Moselle River, demonstrated the M18's potential when properly employed. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command A, faced elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade in conditions that should have favoured the defenders. On September 19th, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon engaged German armour in heavy fog at extremely close range, visibility limited to 30 feet. In the first 5 minutes, his M18s destroyed 5 German tanks while losing just 1 vehicle. The engagement continued with 10 additional enemy tanks destroyed for the loss of 2 more M18. Captain Tom Evans earned the Distinguished Service Cross after personally manning a disabled M18's gun to destroy enemy panzers. The overall results at Aracourt were absolutely staggering. 39 German tanks destroyed for 4 M18s lost and 3 damaged, a 5.6 to 1 kill ratio that validated the tank-destroyer concept. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 became the Hellcat's most legendary proving ground. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, described by General Andrew D. Bruce as the finest tank destroyer battalion yet trained, rushed to defend Bastogne, providing critical armoured support for the 101st Airborne Division. On December 19th through 20th, 1944, near Neuville, M18s from both the 609th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions engaged elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. The 69th arrived first with Team de Sobry, inflicting 600 to 1,000 German casualties while achieving a crucial 48-hour delay. The 75th would later receive a Presidential Unit citation for actions at Bastogne from December 18th to 27th, 1944. On Christmas Day 1944 alone, the 75th destroyed 27 German tanks while losing 6 M18s engaging the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, maintaining their exceptional kill ratios even in the most desperate fighting. Overall, during the siege of Bastogne, the 705th destroyed approximately 40 German tanks for 6 M18 losses, achieving a 6.7 to 1 kill ratio. The Hellcat's advantages increased in adverse conditions. While German heavy tanks struggled in mud and snow, the M18's lightweight and low ground pressure allowed maintained mobility. During the Bulge's opening phase, heavy fog grounded air support and limited visibility to under 100 metres. German doctrine relied on long-range gunnery superiority, now negated. Hellcat crews, trained for close-range ambush at Camp Hood's Revolutionary Battle Conditioning Course, thrived in these conditions. The M18's lightweight provided strategic mobility German heavy tanks couldn't match. While a King Tiger required Class 70 bridges, rare in Europe, the M18 could cross basically any structure that could support a loaded truck. This advantage proved decisive during Rhine crossings. While German heavy tanks searched for intact bridges strong enough to support them, Hellcats crossed on temporary structures erected by combat engineers. While American factories built 2,507 M18 Hellcats between July 1943 and October 1944, Germany struggled throughout the war to produce heavy tanks. Total Panther production reached approximately 6,000 vehicles, while only 492 King Tigers and 1,347 Tiger Is were ever built. The mathematics of industrial capacity were inescapable. For every Panther produced, America built 8 tank destroyers and tanks total. German tank crews faced not just superior tactics, but overwhelming numbers. American production included 49,234 M4 Shermans, 2,507 M18 Hellcats, 2,324 M10 tank destroyers, 2,073 M36 tank destroyers, plus 88,410 other armoured vehicles. The Tank Destroyer Schools program included 17 weeks of intensive training, with emphasis on speed, mobility and initiative. The facility, commanded initially by Lieutenant Colonel, later Brigadier General Andrew D. Bruce, could train 100,000 soldiers simultaneously with 28 battalions and 8 groups in various stages of preparation. Crews practiced high-speed firing, rapid displacement and coordinated attacks until these became instinctive. The Revolutionary Battle Conditioning Course, originally called the Tank Hunting Course, became the first U.S. Army training to employ live fire overhead, with trainees spending a full week in simulated combat conditions. By late 1944, American tank destroyer doctrine had evolved from initial concepts to proven combat techniques. Field Manual 18-5, published in June 1942, emphasized that tank destroyers must not be employed as tanks. Instead, aggressive spirit combined with stealth and deception became the cornerstone of successful tank destroyer employment. M18 crews developed wolfpack tactics, 3 or 4 Hellcats operating in coordinated but independent attacks, communicating by radio to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining constant movement. By war's end, M18 Hellcat units had achieved remarkable combat statistics. The Army Historical Foundation documents 526 total enemy armoured vehicle kills, 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy and 11 in the Pacific, with approximately 216 M18s lost to enemy fire in the European theatre. This produced an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1, 2.3 to 1 in Europe specifically, the highest of any US tank or tank destroyer in World War II. Individual unit achievements often exceeded these averages. The 63rd Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed upwards of 90 enemy armoured fighting vehicles. The 74th achieved similar numbers, with their Aracourt engagement alone accounting for 39 kills. The 75th's performance at Bastogne, 40 tanks destroyed for 6 lost, demonstrated sustained excellence. The 61st Tank Destroyer Battalion achieved the highest documented ratio at nearly 23 to 1. Loss analysis revealed that 40 to 50% of M18 casualties resulted from enemy tanks and anti-tank guns exploiting the vehicle's minimal armour, while 25 to 35% stemmed from mechanical breakdowns. Remaining losses came from infantry anti-tank weapons, artillery and mines. The fundamental difference between German and American armoured vehicle design philosophy becomes clear when comparing specifications. The Panther weighed exactly 44.8 to 45 tons with 80mm frontal armour sloped at 55 degrees, effective approximately 140mm. The Tiger Y weighed 57 tons with 100mm vertical frontal armour. The King Tiger reached 69.8 tons with 150mm sloped frontal armour and 180mm turret armour. Against this, the M18 Hellcat weighed just 17.7 to 20 tons, with armour ranging from 12.7mm on the hull to 25.4mm on the turret front, thinner than some German armoured cars. Yet this apparent vulnerability enabled the speed that became its primary defence. At 500 metres, a Hellcat moving perpendicular at 40 miles per hour would cross a Tiger's gun arc in 4.5 seconds, faster than the gunner could track with manual traverse after hydraulic failure, a common combat occurrence. Beyond speed, the M18 demonstrated superior mechanical reliability compared to German heavy tanks. The Wright R975 radial engine, derived from proven aircraft designs, started reliably even in sub-zero conditions. German tank crews, using diesel engines requiring careful warm-up procedures, couldn't understand how Hellcats could start instantly and accelerate immediately. The Panther's sophisticated transmission, while technically advanced, proved fragile under combat conditions. Final drive failures plagued the design throughout its service life. The Tiger II's complexity meant that more were lost to mechanical failure than enemy action. Meanwhile, the M18's simplified design, using proven automotive components wherever possible, ensured consistent operational readiness. American logistical superiority amplified the M18's effectiveness. While German tanks often sat idle for lack of fuel, spare parts or ammunition, Hellcat units maintained high operational rates through efficient supply chains. The famous Red Ball Express and similar logistics operations ensured consistent fuel deliveries, while standardized parts meant easy field maintenance. German forces, by late 1944, faced chronic fuel shortages. Operation Watch on the Rhine, the German Ardennes offensive, partially aimed to capture Allied fuel dumps because German supplies couldn't sustain prolonged operations. This fuel situation meant German tanks often fought defensively from static positions, exactly where the mobile Hellcat held maximum advantage. Every M18 carried both radio and intercom systems that worked reliably, SCR 508 or SCR 528 radio sets providing consistent communication. German tanks, especially by late 1944, often operated with degraded or non-functional communications, relying on signal flags or pre-battle planning. This seemingly minor detail had major tactical implications. Hellcat platoons coordinated attacks in real time, adjusting to German responses instantly. When 4 Hellcats attacked from different directions, they operated as a single organism through radio coordination. German tanks, often fighting in communication isolation, couldn't match this flexibility. Before the Hellcat's legendary performance in northwest Europe, the Italian campaign provided German forces with their first warnings. In May 1944, during the breakout from Anzio, the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats faced elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. The terrain, rolling hills with vineyards and stone walls, should have neutralized the M18's speed advantage. Instead, it amplified their psychological impact. The Hellcats used their ability to accelerate up 30-degree slopes at speeds German tanks couldn't achieve on flat ground, creating an illusion of omnipresence by appearing at multiple points along ridgelines in rapid succession. This early demonstration of Hellcat capabilities went largely unheeded by German High Command, who remained focused on the Eastern Front where most German armour was committed. Winter 1944-45 proved that the Hellcat's advantages actually increased in adverse conditions. The M18's wide tracks and lightweight, producing just 10.5 psi ground pressure, allowed movement through snow that trapped heavier vehicles. German Tigers and Panthers, already struggling with mechanical reliability, found their mobility further reduced by winter conditions. During the Battle of the Bulge, Hellcat crews exploited these conditions expertly. They used their speed to race through areas where German heavy tanks bogged down, appearing behind German lines where heavy armour was thought impossible. This mobility in poor conditions contributed significantly to the successful defence of Bastogne. German forces attempted various counter-tactics against the Hellcat threat. Updated tactical manuals recommended immediate smoke deployment when M18s were identified, essentially blinding themselves in hopes the threat would pass. Other desperate measures included welding additional track links to side armour, ineffective against 76mm rounds, and creating deliberate ambushes with hidden anti-tank guns. Nothing worked consistently. The Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, and tactical flexibility proved insurmountable with available German resources. The vehicle's very presence altered German behaviour. Commanders became reluctant to commit armour without extensive reconnaissance, sacrificing initiative and momentum. In March 1945, near Remagen, M18s from the 656th Tank Destroyer Battalion crossed the captured Ludendorff Bridge while it was too damaged for heavier vehicles. They established a screen that destroyed 11 German tanks attempting to approach the bridge, including 2 King Tigers that couldn't maneuver quickly enough in the confined terrain. This action demonstrated the strategic value of the M18's lightweight. While German heavy tanks required specific routes and specially reinforced bridges, Hellcats could use any crossing that supported truck traffic, appearing in impossible locations behind German lines. April 1945 saw the Ruhr Pocket become a massive trap for German army groups. The 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats conducted what historians consider exemplary tank destroyer operations, racing through collapsing German lines at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour on cleared autobahns, appearing deep in German rear areas before commanders knew the front had been penetrated. These final operations demonstrated the M18 concept brought to full maturity. Speed as weapon, mobility as armour, surprise as primary tactic. German defensive positions designed to stop deliberate attacks by heavy tanks proved useless against vehicles that simply raced around them at highway speeds. Post-war analysis by US Army historians validated the M18 concept, despite its limitations. The 76mm gun's inability to penetrate Panther or Tiger frontal armour with standard ammunition forced reliance on flanking attacks, situations where the vehicle's speed became essential. With standard M62 APCBC rounds achieving only 93mm penetration at 500 yards and scarce HVAP rounds, crews had to close to suicidal ranges for frontal engagements against German heavy tanks. Yet the combat record speaks definitively. 526 confirmed kills against 216 combat losses produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armoured vehicle in World War II. This success came not from superior firepower or protection, but from revolutionary employment of speed and mobility combined with superior crew training. The M18 Hellcat represented more than just a vehicle. It embodied a completely different conception of armoured warfare. While Germany perfected the tank as breakthrough weapon and mobile fortress, America created something new, the tank destroyer as pure hunter. The tank destroyer force's motto, "Seek, strike and destroy," proved prophetic. By war's end, American tank destroyer battalions claimed over 11,000 enemy vehicles destroyed in total, with Hellcat units achieving the highest kill ratios. The doctrine emphasized that tank destroyers were not tanks and shouldn't fight like tanks. They were hunters that struck from ambush and vanished. Beyond tactical success, the Hellcat achieved strategic effects. German armoured reserves, instead of concentrating for offensive operations, were increasingly held back to guard against tank destroyer raids. The mere presence of Hellcat units in a sector could freeze German armoured movement for hours, while commanders sought confirmation of their locations. During the Ardennes offensive, intercepted German communications revealed commanders requesting verification that no Hellcats were present before committing reserves. Hours were lost to reconnaissance, momentum sacrificed to caution. The offensive that was supposed to split Allied forces was partially paralysed by fear of vehicles weighing less than half a Panther. The 2,507 Hellcats built represented American industrial philosophy, not perfection, but practical efficiency. While Germany built 6,000 Panthers over 3 years, struggling with quality control and component shortages, Buick produced all M18 in just 15 months, using proven components and simplified construction. German engineers, when examining captured M18s, noted the apparent crudity. Functional welds rather than perfect joints, armour plates showing tool marks, interior ergonomics seemingly accidental. Yet this crude vehicle consistently destroyed German tanks built with watchmaker precision. The difference lay in design philosophy. Germany built engineering monuments while America built practical tools. Behind the statistics lay human tragedy on both sides. Young German tankers, many still teenagers by 1945, faced an enemy that negated everything they'd been taught. Their carefully maintained Panthers and Tigers, representing the peak of German engineering, burned just as readily when struck by Hellcat rounds fired from ambush. American crews, while suffering far fewer losses, carried their own burdens. The speed that saved them also meant striking without warning, often giving German crews no chance to surrender or escape. The minimal armour meant that when M18s were hit, catastrophic losses often resulted, though the open-topped turret design actually improved crew survival rates to over 80% compared to just 35% for German heavy tank crews. The M18 Hellcat's influence extended beyond World War II. Post-war armies studied its employment, recognizing that mobility could trump protection in certain circumstances. Modern military doctrine's emphasis on shoot and scoot, rapid displacement and mobility as survival techniques all trace roots to M18 employment in 1944 through 45. Today at Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, a restored M18 Hellcat stands at the Armour School entrance. Its plaque commemorates it as the fastest armoured fighting vehicle of World War II and proof that American ingenuity and mass production could defeat sophisticated enemy tanks through speed and tactical innovation. The final accounting of the Hellcat's impact tells the complete story. Production total manufactured reached 2,507 units. Production period spanned July 1943 to October 1944, 15 months total. Peak production hit 267 units in November 1943. Unit cost measured $57,500 in 1943 currency. Production location was Buick Division, Flint, Michigan. Performance specifications showed maximum speed of 55 miles per hour governed, 60 miles per hour ungoverned. Acceleration from 0 to 30 miles per hour took 7 seconds. Range measured 100 to 105 miles. Power-to-weight ratio achieved 20 to 22.5 horsepower per ton. Ground pressure measured 10.5 psi. Combat record showed enemy vehicles destroyed at 526 confirmed. M18s lost to enemy fire totaled 216. Overall kill ratio reached 2.4 to 1. European theatre ratio measured 2.3 to 1. Comparative German tank specifications showed the Panther at 44.8 to 45 tons, 15 horsepower per ton, 34 miles per hour maximum. Tiger Y measured 57 tons, 100 mm frontal armour, 23 miles per hour maximum. King Tiger reached 69.8 tons, 150 mm frontal armour, 26 miles per hour maximum. The supreme irony of the Hellcat story is that German doctrine created the conditions for its success. By building increasingly heavy tanks, Panthers, Tigers, King Tigers, Germany created slow, road-bound targets perfect for Hellcat tactics. Had Germany continued developing lighter, mobile tanks, the Hellcat's advantages would have been minimized. Every ton added to German tanks made them more vulnerable to American tank destroyers. The pursuit of invulnerable supertanks created vehicles that couldn't respond to high-speed warfare. In building fortresses, Germany became vulnerable to enemies that fought like cavalry, racing cars with guns that struck and vanished before retaliation was possible. The M18 Hellcat proved that victory doesn't require the best equipment, it requires the right equipment properly employed. German crews in their magnificent Panthers and Tigers were defeated by American crews in vehicles that seemed impossibly vulnerable. It remains one of history's great examples of doctrine defeating technology. Military historian Stephen J. Zaloga characterized the M18 as poorly balanced, while noting its success was attributable to the training and dedication of its crews, not to its ill-conceived design. Yet this assessment misses a crucial point. The poor balance of extreme speed over armour protection was precisely what enabled the revolutionary tactics that produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armoured vehicle in World War II. For German tank crews in 1944 through 45, 3 minutes was all they had. 3 minutes from the first sound of high-revving engines to the impact of 76mm rounds. 3 minutes to identify the threat, traverse their turret, acquire target and fire, while the Hellcat was already racing to its next position at 55 miles per hour. 3 minutes that usually ended with their tank burning and the Hellcat vanishing into the distance, seeking its next victim. The Hellcat proved that in modern warfare, speed doesn't just kill, it renders strength irrelevant. The German crews who survived those 3 minutes learned a lesson that would reshape armoured warfare doctrine. Sometimes the best armour is not being where the enemy can shoot you. Sometimes the most powerful gun is the one that fires from where the enemy doesn't expect. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from building the strongest tank, but from building the right tank for the war you're actually fighting. In those 3 minutes lay the difference between old thinking and new, between fighting the last war and fighting the current one, between perfection and pragmatism. The M18 Hellcat, under-armoured, outgunned by German tanks, dismissed by some as poorly designed, achieved what German supertanks could not. Battlefield dominance through speed, training, and revolutionary employment. For German tank crews facing M18 Hellcats, 3 minutes was a lifetime. For most, it was all the lifetime they had left. The lesson echoed across battlefields from the Ardennes to the Rhine. Traditional concepts of armoured superiority meant nothing when the enemy refused to fight traditionally. The Germans had built tanks to win the last war, perfecting lessons learned from Poland and France. The Americans built machines to win the current war, adapting to conditions as they found them. In the frozen Belgian forests, in the muddy fields of France, across the rivers of Germany, the story repeated itself. The sound of engines, the crack of 76mm guns, the sight of targets burning, and then silence as the Hellcats disappeared. German tank commanders radioed warnings, shared intelligence, updated tactical manuals. Nothing helped. The fundamental problem wasn't lack of information or poor tactics. It was that their entire approach to armoured warfare had been rendered obsolete by an enemy that moved faster than their doctrine could accommodate. The production numbers tell their own story. While Buick churned out Hellcats at rates German factories could only dream of matching, each vehicle rolled off the assembly line ready for immediate combat. No extensive modifications needed, no field corrections required. The design worked exactly as intended from the first production model. German tanks, magnificent as they were, often required extensive modifications before being considered combat-ready. Panthers needed transmission replacements, Tigers needed suspension upgrades, King Tigers needed everything adjusted and readjusted. The American approach of building simple, functional machines proved superior to the German pursuit of engineering perfection. Training made the difference as much as the vehicles themselves. At Camp Hood, crews learned to think differently about armoured combat. Forget about standing and fighting. Forget about armour protection. Forget about everything traditional tank doctrine taught. Instead, think like a hunter. Find the prey, strike from ambush, disappear before retaliation. The training was intense, realistic, and absolutely focused on the mission. Crews graduated knowing exactly what their vehicle could and couldn't do, and more importantly, knowing how to exploit what it could do while avoiding situations that exposed its limitations. German training, excellent as it was, prepared crews for a different kind of war. Stand and fight, use superior armour and firepower to defeat the enemy, advance methodically. All good tactics for the war Germany thought it was fighting, completely inadequate for the war America brought to Europe. The Hellcat crews weren't better trained in any absolute sense. They were better trained for the specific mission they would face. That specificity made all the difference. The psychological impact on German forces cannot be overstated. Imagine being a tank commander, knowing you have the most powerful tank in the world, the best armour, the best gun, superior training. Then imagine being destroyed by a vehicle you barely saw, that appeared and disappeared faster than you could react, that violated everything you knew about how tanks should fight. The confidence that came from superior equipment evaporated. Tank commanders became cautious, hesitant, reluctant to commit their forces. The offensive spirit that had carried German armour across Europe died in those Belgian forests. American commanders recognized what they had created, not just a vehicle, but a complete system. The M18 was worthless without proper training. Proper training was worthless without proper doctrine. Proper doctrine was worthless without proper support. But when all elements came together, when well-trained crews operating under appropriate doctrine with adequate logistical support employed their Hellcats as intended, the results were devastating. The kill ratios weren't accidents or lucky breaks. They were the inevitable result of a complete system operating exactly as designed. The German response revealed the depth of their problem. They couldn't build faster tanks because their doctrine demanded heavy armor. They couldn't abandon heavy armor because their doctrine demanded protection. They couldn't change doctrine because their entire military philosophy was built around it. They were trapped by their own success, locked into an approach that had worked brilliantly for years but had now been rendered obsolete. The Americans, unburdened by previous success and willing to try radical approaches, could innovate in ways Germany couldn't match. Industrial capacity amplified every American advantage. Each M18 lost could be replaced within days. Each crew casualty could be replaced with a fully trained soldier from Camp Hood's continuous production of qualified personnel. German losses were permanent. Each Panther destroyed was gone forever. Each experienced crew killed couldn't be replaced with anything approaching their skill level. The arithmetic was brutal and unavoidable. America could afford to take risks, to accept losses, to learn from mistakes. Germany couldn't afford any of that. The reliability factor deserves emphasis. American crews could count on their vehicles starting every morning, running all day, and being ready to fight whenever needed. German crews never knew if their sophisticated machines would function properly. The psychological burden of unreliable equipment added to everything else. Not only were they facing an enemy that moved impossibly fast, but they couldn't even trust their own vehicles to respond when needed. The combination was crushing. Communication superiority gave American forces yet another edge. Every Hellcat could talk to every other Hellcat instantly. Coordinated attacks happened in real time, with vehicles adjusting to each other's movements and the enemy's responses moment by moment. German tanks, often unable to communicate at all, fought as isolated units, even when operating in groups. The Americans fought as interconnected systems. This networking advantage, so obvious now in modern warfare, was revolutionary in 1944. The Italian campaign's lessons went unheeded by German high command, a critical error. When the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion demonstrated what Hellcats could do against the Hermann Göring Division, clear warnings existed. Fast American tank destroyers with powerful guns could dominate terrain that should have favoured defenders. The reports were filed, read, and apparently forgotten. By the time German forces in northwest Europe faced massed Hellcat battalions, it was too late to develop effective countermeasures. Winter operations exposed German vulnerabilities even more starkly. The Hellcat's lightweight and wide tracks gave it mobility in conditions that paralysed German heavy armour. While Tigers and Panthers struggled through snow and mud, Hellcats raced past them, hitting from unexpected directions because German commanders had calculated that the terrain made those approaches impossible. The Americans made the impossible routine, exploiting their mobility advantages in every possible way. The Remagen bridge crossing exemplified everything about the Hellcat concept. German heavy tanks couldn't use the damaged bridge. King Tigers had to find other routes. Meanwhile, Hellcats crossed immediately, establishing positions on the far side, destroying German armour trying to respond. The strategic mobility advantage let Americans be where Germans thought they couldn't be, doing what Germans thought they couldn't do. Speed and lightweight construction weren't just tactical advantages. They were operational and strategic advantages too. The Ruhr pocket operations showed the Hellcat at its absolute peak, racing through collapsing German lines at highway speeds, appearing in rear areas before anyone knew the front had been breached, destroying supply columns and command posts and reserve formations. This wasn't tank warfare as anyone had previously understood it. This was cavalry warfare with modern weapons, exploiting speed and surprise to create chaos far beyond the actual damage inflicted. German commanders lost control of the situation not because they were defeated in battle, but because the battle moved faster than they could comprehend. Post-war analyses by both sides reached similar conclusions. The M18 succeeded not despite its apparent weaknesses, but because of them. The thin armour forced crews to rely on speed and surprise. The relatively light gun forced crews to seek flanking positions. The limitations created excellence by eliminating any option except perfect execution of doctrine. German tanks, with their heavy armour and powerful guns, allowed crews to fight in ways that should have worked but didn't against this particular enemy. The human dimension deserves remembrance. Young men on both sides, most barely out of their teens, fought with incredible bravery and skill. German tankers, knowing their powerful machines couldn't catch the enemy, still went into battle. American crews, knowing their thin armour meant certain death if hit, still closed to killing range. The courage on both sides was remarkable. The tragedy is that so many died fighting in a war that never should have happened. The survival rate difference between M18 crews and German heavy tank crews reflects design philosophy. The open-topped turret, criticised as a vulnerability, actually saved lives. When an M18 was hit, crews could bail out instantly. German tankers, trapped in enclosed turrets, often died even when their tanks survived the initial hit. The Americans built a vehicle that protected its crews' lives, if not their vehicle. The Germans built vehicles that protected neither when facing weapons powerful enough to defeat their armour. The Hellcat's legacy in modern armoured warfare is profound. Every current doctrine emphasising mobility, every tank designed with speed as a primary characteristic, every training program teaching shoot and scoot tactics, all trace directly to lessons learned from M18 employment in World War II. The idea that mobility could be armour, that speed could be protection, that the best defence might be not being where the enemy could shoot you, all revolutionary in 1944, are now fundamental to armoured warfare doctrine worldwide. The specific numbers bear repeating because they tell the story so clearly. 2,507 vehicles built in 15 months, 526 enemy vehicles destroyed, 216 M18s lost to enemy fire, 2.4 to 1 overall kill ratio, individual battalions achieving ratios as high as 23 to 1. These aren't statistics. These are the measure of a revolutionary approach to warfare, validated in the crucible of combat against an experienced and skilled enemy. The comparison between German and American industrial approaches highlights deeper differences between the societies. Germany built tanks the way they built everything, seeking perfection through engineering excellence. Each Panther was a masterpiece of design and construction. Each Tiger represented thousands of hours of skilled labour. The problem was that masterpieces take time to create, and Germany didn't have time. America built tanks the way they built cars, efficiently and in vast quantities. Each Hellcat was good enough for its purpose, built quickly using standardized components designed for mass production from the start. The doctrinal flexibility of American forces proved as important as their industrial capacity. When the tank destroyer concept showed promise, resources flowed to it. When training methods needed adjustment, they were adjusted. When tactics needed refinement, they were refined. The system was flexible, adaptive, responsive. German doctrine, ossified by years of success, couldn't adapt quickly enough. By the time German responses to the Hellcat threat were developed, the war was essentially over. The fuel situation deserves emphasis because it reveals strategic realities. German tanks, even when mechanically functional, often couldn't move due to fuel shortages. American Hellcats always had fuel. The Red Ball Express and similar logistics operations ensured supplies reached frontline units. This difference meant that even when both sides had functioning vehicles, only one side could actually employ them. Strategic logistics trumped tactical excellence. The radio communication advantage cannot be overstated. Modern readers, accustomed to instant communication, might not grasp how revolutionary reliable radio systems were in World War II. German tanks often fought blind and deaf, unable to coordinate with adjacent units or receive updated orders. American Hellcats operated as networked systems decades before that term existed. This networking advantage multiplied the effectiveness of individual vehicles, turning platoons into unified fighting systems. The training pipeline from Camp Hood proved as important as the production pipeline from Buick. Well-trained crews made mediocre vehicles effective. Poorly trained crews made excellent vehicles useless. The Americans understood this, dedicating enormous resources to training. The revolutionary battle conditioning course, with live fire overhead and realistic combat conditions, produced crews who didn't freeze in their first engagement. They'd already experienced something similar in training. The German perspective deserves understanding. Tank commanders who'd fought across Europe, who'd destroyed hundreds of enemy tanks, suddenly faced an enemy they couldn't defeat using proven methods. The frustration must have been overwhelming. Everything they knew was wrong. Every tactic they'd perfected was useless. Every advantage they'd relied on was negated. The psychological impact of this realization, that your experience and skill and knowledge meant nothing against this particular enemy, must have been crushing. The 3 minutes became legendary among surviving German tankers. 3 minutes from first contact to destruction or escape. 3 minutes to do everything necessary to survive. Identify the threat, traverse the turret, acquire the target, fire accurately, all while the target was moving at speeds that made tracking nearly impossible. 3 minutes that usually ended in flames and death. The survivors remembered those 3 minutes for the rest of their lives. The American crews had their own psychological burdens. The thin armor meant they lived with constant awareness of vulnerability. One hit would likely kill everyone in the vehicle. The speed that protected them also isolated them, taking them far from friendly forces, deep into enemy territory, alone except for the other Hellcats in their platoon. The courage required to drive deliberately into situations where survival depended entirely on not being hit cannot be overstated. The comparison between the Hellcat and German heavy tanks perfectly illustrates the difference between fighting the war you want to fight and fighting the war that actually exists. Germany wanted to fight a war where heavy armor and powerful guns dominated the battlefield. They built tanks perfectly suited to that war. America looked at the actual war, with its mud and forests and close terrain and limited visibility, and built a vehicle suited to those conditions. One approach led to magnificent but ineffective tanks. The other led to crude but devastatingly effective tank destroyers. The final months of the war showed the Hellcat concept at full maturity. Crews with months of combat experience operating vehicles they understood completely under doctrine, refined through hard-won lessons, achieved results that seemed impossible. Racing through German lines at highway speeds, appearing and disappearing like ghosts, destroying enemy formations before they could respond. This was cavalry warfare updated for the 20th century, combining ancient principles of speed and surprise with modern firepower. For Klaus Wendel, sitting in his Panther on that December morning, the 17 minutes he had left before everything changed represented the end of an era. German armoured warfare, perfected over 5 years, was about to be rendered obsolete. The 3 minutes that followed would teach him that war had changed, that the principles he'd learned no longer applied, that the mighty Panther beneath him was helpless against an enemy that refused to fight the way tanks were supposed to fight. He survived that morning, but thousands of his fellow tankers didn't. They died learning the lesson that speed defeats strength, that mobility trumps protection, that the right weapon properly employed beats the best weapon incorrectly employed. The M18 Hellcat wrote that lesson in fire and steel across the battlefields of Western Europe, and the German tank crews paid the price for their high command's failure to understand that war had changed.